Yesterday, October 16th, 2025, a single photograph sent the scientific world into chaos. A simple telescope image, quietly uploaded to the astronomer's telegram, showing a mysterious interstellar object called 3I Atlas. Now, this wasn't just any space rock. We'd known about 3I Atlas for months, but what we saw in that new image defied the laws of physics. Imagine this: a comet drifting silently through the black, trailing gas and dust as sunlight tears its icy surface apart. That's normal. That's what comets do. They run away from the sun, always. Their tails stretch outward, pushed by solar radiation and the solar wind like smoke blown from a fire. Except this one didn't. The new image showed a narrow plume, a jet of glowing material, pointing straight into the sun, not away, into it. Before we begin, a quick question for you. What time is it where you're watching from? And where in the world are you tuning in from tonight? Let me know in the comments, because as we unravel this mystery, you might want to remember exactly where you were when you first heard about this. It's such a backwards, impossible phenomenon that one astronomer joked, either physics is broken or something built this thing. That's how bizarre it is. The photo came from the Tide 2-meter twin telescope in the Canary Islands, captured back in August but only processed and released now. When the data went public, every scientist from Harvard to Tokyo stopped what they were doing. Phones buzzed, group chats exploded, and the same message kept echoing across every lab. You need to see this. Now, if you've ever looked at raw space imagery, you'll know most of it is grainy, faint, and full of noise. But this one, it was crystal clear. At the center sat a circular mask blocking the glare of the comet's bright nucleus, a common trick to reveal what's around it. Surrounding it was the expected haze, a glowing halo of dust and vapor. And beyond that halo, like an accusing finger, the plume stretched almost 6,000 kilometers directly toward the sun. To put that in perspective, that's roughly half the diameter of Earth, a jet of matter seemingly defying the push of the solar wind. It shouldn't exist, and here's where things get interesting. Every student of astronomy learns the same principle on day one. Solar radiation pushes. Always. There is no known natural process that causes comet material to travel against the sun's force. So, when you see something doing exactly that, you have two options. Either there's a new kind of physics we've never seen before, or something is controlling it. Before we go any further, if mysteries like this fascinate you, if you love exploring the thin line between science and the unknown, make sure you subscribe and turn on notifications, because this story only gets stranger the deeper we go, and you'll want to be here when the next revelation drops. Back to that photo. Scientists ran through every possible mundane explanation. Could it be a processing glitch, a camera artifact, a trick caused by star trails or cosmic rays hitting the detector? Maybe even a reflection inside the telescope optics? No, they checked, rechecked, cross-checked. The jet was real. Hubble saw hints of the same feature months earlier. Ground-based observatories from Chile to Hawaii confirmed it from different angles. Independent data, different instruments, same anomaly. That's when disbelief turned to something else. Fear and wonder. What could possibly create a jet shooting toward the sun? Some said maybe 3I Atlas isn't a comet at all, but a new class of interstellar object, one born around another star, carrying alien chemistry we've never encountered. Others whispered the unthinkable. What if it was built? For centuries we've looked at the stars and assumed comets were just icy remnants, leftovers from creation. But what if some of them are something more? If this is artificial, it would be the first visible sign of technology not from Earth, drifting silently between stars until chance brought it into our view. But scientists are cautious creatures. They don't leap to conclusions. They rule them out one by one. So before calling it alien or impossible, they began what's called confirmation analysis. Multiple telescopes, different wavelengths, checking for patterns that repeat, that persist, that can't be explained away by math or error. And what they found next made the first image look almost ordinary. The light coming from that jet, its chemical fingerprint, didn't match anything we'd seen before in a comet. Instead of being dominated by water vapor, it was rich in carbon dioxide and metallic elements, especially nickel, but almost no iron. That's like finding a human body full of bones, but missing calcium. It doesn't make sense. This strange chemistry added fuel to the mystery, because wherever nickel appears in nature, Iron follows. They're cosmic twins, born together in the hearts of dying stars. For one to appear without the other, that's either a laboratory process or a universe rewriting its own rules. So the question tonight isn't just what 3I Atlas is, it's why it's here and what its behavior is trying to tell us. And as you'll soon see, that answer might shake everything we believe about how life and intelligence spreads across the stars. Because this was only the beginning. The deeper astronomers looked into 3I Atlas, the stranger it became. Its chemistry, its rhythm, its pulse, even its behavior over time seemed to follow a pattern that felt alive. In part 2, we'll step into the lab, where scientists began to test the impossible and where doubt slowly turned into obsession. The object wasn't just defying physics, it was communicating in cycles. When the image of 3I Atlas first spread through the scientific world, disbelief turned into obsession almost overnight. What started as whispers in research forums quickly became the central topic of every astrophysics meeting on Earth. Because if that sunward jet was real, it didn't just bend the rules of comet behavior, it broke them in half. Now, to truly grasp what scientists were up against. Picture this, you're staring through a telescope at a faint smudge of light, billions of kilometers away, and trying to decide whether what you see is reality or just a trick of math. Astronomical images are delicate creatures. They're born from long exposures, hours of light collected photon by photon, processed through algorithms to filter noise and sharpen detail. One wrong step in that chain, one miscalibrated pixel, one cosmic ray, one digital echo, and you can conjure a ghost that doesn't exist. So, the first rule of discovery is always the same. Doubt yourself first. And that's exactly what the teams analyzing the 3I Atlas data did. They ran the image through every possible filter. They stripped it back to the raw photons. They compared it to control exposures, to background stars, to reference images taken at the same time. Was the jet just a statistical artifact? A trick of Laplacian filtering? Where faint light from nearby stars can create false structures? Maybe. But when they compared multiple nights of data, the jet didn't vanish. It moved consistently with the comet itself. That's not noise. That's physics. Across the world, other observatories joined in. The Hubble Space Telescope, floating high above Earth's atmosphere, locked onto 3I Atlas and saw something eerily similar. A faint extension in the same sunward direction. Telescopes in Chile, Spain, and Hawaii confirmed the same asymmetry. That's when the whisper turned into a realization. This thing isn't lying. You could almost hear the tension in conference calls. Scientists don't like miracles. They like math. And when math stops making sense, the sleepless nights begin. It's not supposed to do that, one researcher muttered, staring at spectra that refused to behave. Another joked that maybe the comet was flipping us off, pointing its jet at the sun out of cosmic spite. But under the laughter was unease, because this jet wasn't just pointing toward the sun, it was chemically alive. Spectroscopic analysis began pouring in. Light from the jet was broken into its component colors, each wavelength like a fingerprint, revealing the identity of the molecules and atoms emitting it. What they found wasn't what anyone expected. Instead of the typical water vapor, carbon monoxide, and simple organics found in every comet before it, 3I Atlas's jet was dominated by something else entirely. Neutral nickel atoms. Strong, clean, unmistakable emission lines from nickel, without the usual partner, iron. If you're wondering why that's such a big deal, here's why. Nickel and iron are cosmic siblings. They're forged together in the hearts of dying stars and distributed across the galaxy by supernova explosions. They exist side by side in meteorites, planets, even the core of Earth itself. Their ratio is one of the most stable fingerprints in nature. So when you find nickel without iron, you have two options. Either nature has discovered a way to play favorites, or someone engineered it that way. That's when the first wild theories began to surface. Maybe 3I Atlas wasn't a normal comet at all. Maybe it was a fragment of some metallic body, an ancient shard of a world that formed around a carbon-rich star, where chemistry followed different rules. Or perhaps more unsettlingly, maybe part of it wasn't natural, but science demands restraint. So before anyone dared whisper the A word, artificial, they went back to the data. They tested every natural mechanism they could imagine. Could solar heating drive gas backward if the comet's rotation created pressure differences? No, the math didn't work. Could magnetic fields around the sun deflect particles into a sunward jet? Not strong enough. Could solar wind turbulence or electrostatic charging on the comet's surface cause localized venting? Maybe, but the scale didn't fit. At this point, they weren't just verifying a discovery. They were performing forensics on the universe itself. Every telescope became a detective, every researcher a suspect interrogator, and then something else emerged. The jet wasn't constant. It pulsed. At first, the pattern was subtle, barely perceptible changes in brightness, like the heartbeat of a sleeping giant. But after weeks of observation, the data revealed something unmistakable: a cycle. Every 4 hours, the jet brightened and dimmed with almost mechanical precision. The comet wasn't just venting gas randomly, it was breathing in a rhythm. Now think about that. Nature is chaotic. Comets spin irregularly, tumble, fracture, erupt unpredictably. They do not keep time. And yet, here was an object, an interstellar wanderer from beyond our solar system, releasing matter with the consistency of a metronome. The most logical explanation was rotation. If the nucleus of 3I Atlas rotated every 4 hours, then maybe one side had an active vent that turned toward the sun at regular intervals. But that theory had cracks. For the rhythm to be that perfect, the comet's surface would have to be unusually stable and uniform, more like a manufactured shell than a pile of cosmic rubble. Still, the scientists wrote their papers, cautiously phrasing their conclusions. We propose rotational modulation consistent with a 4-hour period. That's academic code, for we don't know what this thing is, but it's weird as hell. Then came a second discovery that complicated everything. A faint secondary rhythm, 2 hours. Not just one pulse, but 2 overlapping frequencies, like a binary beat. If 3I Atlas was rotating, then maybe it wasn't a single body. Maybe it was a binary pair. 2 objects orbiting each other every few hours, locked in a cosmic dance, sharing material and venting gas as they spun. That would explain the rhythmic pattern, but it didn't explain why the gas went toward the sun, so the questions multiplied. Every new telescope that joined the hunt added more data and more confusion. The European Space Agency, NASA, even private observatories turned their instruments toward the mystery traveler. Everyone wanted a piece of it, because deep down, they all felt the same chill. This might be history. One researcher later described the feeling like this: it was as if something out there wanted to be seen, but only just enough to make us doubt what we were seeing. Meanwhile, the world outside the labs was catching on. Social media lit up with speculation. Hashtags like Gachu Sunward Jet and Dacha 3 Atlas trended for days. Memes mixed with genuine curiosity. Was it a comet, a probe, an alien engine, or a cosmic prank by nature itself? And as the noise grew, so did the pressure. Astronomers who normally spent their nights in quiet observatories found themselves facing cameras, defending data they didn't fully understand. Some called for patience, others called for transparency. A few simply smiled and said, "We're looking at something we've never seen before." In the background, however, whispers began circulating about something even more exciting. 2 spacecraft, already in flight, about to pass close enough to 3I Atlas to collect first-hand data. One was ESA's Hera mission, bound for the asteroid Didymos system. The other, NASA's Europa Clipper, en route to Jupiter. Neither mission was designed for this, but by sheer coincidence, or fate, they were both about to enter the comet's neighborhood. And that's when scientists realized something that sent a shiver down everyone's spine. We were about to see it up close. In the next chapter, we'll follow those spacecraft, machines built by human hands, about to fly through the wake of something that might not be entirely natural. What they found could confirm everything, or destroy the mystery forever. By the time October drifted into its final week, every major observatory on Earth had joined the hunt for 3I Atlas. And the deeper scientists looked, the stranger it became. The object wasn't just breaking the rules of comet physics, it was rewriting the chemistry of the cosmos itself. At first, it was supposed to be simple. Comets, after all, are supposed to be dirty snowballs, frozen relics from the dawn of a solar system. We know their formula by heart: water ice, dust, carbon monoxide, maybe a dash of methane or ammonia for flavor. But when astronomers turned their spectrometers toward 3I Atlas, when they broke its light into color to read the hidden message in its glow, what they found didn't just surprise them, it scared them. Because 3I Atlas wasn't giving off the familiar fingerprints of water and dust. It was glowing with the spectral lines of nickel, not in trace amounts, not faintly, but as a dominant signal. Nickel atoms, pure and neutral, shining like beacons in the data, and what was missing was even more shocking. No iron. It was like listening to a song where every note was there, except the bass line that holds it all together. Iron is the bedrock of matter, the most stable element produced by the death of stars. Every comet, every meteorite, every planet, everything we've ever studied out there has iron. It's the universe's favorite building block. But here, nothing. The nickel was shouting, and iron was silent. That single discovery turned 3I Atlas from a curiosity into an anomaly of galactic proportions. Because there's no natural process, none we know of, that creates nickel in isolation. Wherever nickel forms, iron forms right alongside it. They're twins, born together in the same stellar fires, traveling through time and space hand in hand. Finding one without the other was like finding smoke without fire. At first, scientists tried to explain it away. Maybe the iron was there, just hidden, bound in molecules too heavy to detect. Maybe the spectrographs weren't sensitive enough. But the more they looked, the clearer the signal became. The nickel lines were clean, sharp, unmistakable, and the iron lines were missing completely. Then came the next shock. Water, the lifeblood of every comet, was almost gone. Instead, 3I Atlas was dominated by carbon dioxide, nearly 8 times more CO2 than water vapor. That ratio is unheard of. Even the coldest, strangest comets in our own solar system can't match it. One astronomer from the European Southern Observatory said it best. It's as if the comet skipped being a snowball and became a dry ice factory instead. But even that wasn't the weirdest part. When they modelled how the object would heat up as it approached the sun, the equations didn't line up. The outgassing, the way the gases were escaping, didn't match the temperature. It was too organised, too steady. That's when a few late-night conversations began drifting into dangerous territory. Someone asked, what if it's not natural chemistry? What if it's manufactured material? At first, it was said half-jokingly between sips of cold coffee. But then someone pointed out something chilling. Nickel isn't just any metal. It's engineered. It's in our phones, our batteries, our spaceships, our surgical tools, our turbines, our spacecraft hulls. If someone out there, somewhere, wanted to build a probe that could survive interstellar travel for millions of years, nickel would be one of the first materials they'd choose. Because nickel resists corrosion. It endures radiation. It can handle heat, pressure, and cosmic punishment. It's the perfect armor for eternity. And if such a probe existed, drifting between stars covered in nickel alloys, what would happen when it finally got close enough to a star to start shedding its skin? Exactly what we're seeing. Nickel vapor, outgassing, and an eerie absence of iron. But of course, the scientific world doesn't just leap to alien probe. They searched for natural answers first. Maybe 3I Atlas was formed in a carbon-rich nebula where iron was chemically locked away. Maybe its nickel came from strange metal-carbon compounds, nickel carbonyls, that break down at specific temperatures. That could theoretically cause nickel to vent before iron. But to form those compounds, you'd need conditions so specific, low oxygen, high carbon, precise pressure, that they'd be rare even around exotic stars. Still, it was the most rational idea they had. The others were harder to accept. Some researchers quietly floated the possibility that 3I Atlas was part of something larger, maybe a fragment, a shard of a world torn apart long ago, or debris from a system where the chemistry of life itself evolved differently. Others, more daring, wondered if it could be a relic, a derelict probe, ancient and broken, now slowly disintegrating as it drifts through the galaxy. No one could say for sure, but the evidence was stacking up. The unnatural jet, the pulsing rhythm, the nickel chemistry, the missing iron. Each one could be dismissed on its own, but together, they started to form a pattern. By the time the James Webb Space Telescope joined the investigation, the world was watching like never before. JWST's infrared instruments locked onto 3I Atlas and confirmed what everyone feared or hoped. The CO2 levels weren't just high, they were off the charts, 8-to-1, 8 times more carbon dioxide than water. That's when a new theory took root, one that bridged science and speculation. What if 3I Atlas wasn't just made of exotic material? What if it was built to survive it? Think about it. An interstellar traveler, coated in metals designed to resist corrosion, with gases trapped inside that release in rhythmic bursts. not chaotically, but cyclically. It behaves like a machine venting pressure, not like a rock melting in sunlight. And that rhythmic pulse? Every 4 hours, like clockwork, it releases gas. You could explain that as rotation, sure. But what if it's more like a heartbeat? Or an exhaust cycle? That question haunted every lab from Chile to Maryland. The data didn't fit, the math didn't balance, and the chemistry refused to behave. It was as though nature herself had decided to prank the human species. Or remind us we might not be alone. The deeper scientists dug, the more personal it became. A few even stopped calling it the comet. They called it her. Because somehow, this object felt intentional, conscious even. And then, just as the world's curiosity hit a fever pitch, 2 spacecraft, Hera and Europa Clipper, quietly prepared to pass near its path. They weren't built for this mission, but they might hold the key to unraveling the mystery once and for all. As one NASA engineer put it, "We've built our eyes to look for worlds, but this time it feels like the universe is looking back." The countdown was on. Within days, we would know whether 3I Atlas was just an eccentric comet, or something no one on Earth was ready to believe. The first time anyone noticed it, it was just a flicker. A tiny, almost invisible variation in brightness, buried deep inside the data. Most researchers brushed it off as noise, a fluctuation caused by sunlight reflecting off the comet's irregular surface. Space is full of such tricks. A little spin here, a shadow there, and the numbers start to dance. But for a handful of astronomers, the kind of people who notice patterns others overlook, that flicker felt different. It wasn't random, it was rhythmic. Every 4 hours, 3I Atlas pulsed. The light curve, a graph of its brightness over time, showed small but unmistakable rises and dips. Precise, predictable, clockwork. For weeks, the pattern held steady, repeating like a heartbeat you could set your watch to. At first, the explanation seemed obvious. Rotation, they said. The object must be spinning, exposing different areas to sunlight. As one side heated up, gas would escape, brightening the comet. When that side turned away, it cooled, dimming again. A perfectly natural process. Easy, clean, mathematical. But nothing about 3I Atlas had been easy so far. The more they studied the rhythm, the more it refused to fit any normal rotational model. The timing was too precise, to the second. Comets wobble, they tumble. Their jets make them spin erratically, speeding up and slowing down like broken tops. But 3I Atlas kept perfect time, as if guided by an internal mechanism. Then came something no one expected. After weeks of steady 4-hour pulses, a second pattern appeared. A smaller peak every 2 hours. Like a heartbeat inside a heartbeat, double rhythm, dual frequencies. It was beautiful and terrifying. When they overlaid the 2 cycles, something emerged that looked eerily similar to a communication signal. An amplitude-modulated pattern. The kind of pulse you'd expect from a machine encoding data, not from a lump of ice and rock drifting through the void. Of course, scientists are trained to avoid imagination. They don't like words like communication or signal. But the universe doesn't care what we're comfortable with. It just presents facts, and this fact was inescapable. 3I Atlas was behaving as if it knew the rules of timing. The pulse wasn't caused by sunlight either. That was the next shock. When they plotted the pulses against the comet's distance from the sun, there was no correlation. It didn't speed up or slow down as it got warmer. It stayed constant, as though it were keeping time to something else. A rhythm older and deeper than sunlight itself. Now, in any other era, this would have stayed locked in academic papers, buried under technical jargon, but we don't live in that kind of world anymore. Within days, data leaked. Graphs, charts, light curves, all uploaded anonymously to online forums and Reddit threads. The internet did what it always does. It exploded. People began posting wild theories. Some said 3I Atlas was a beacon broadcasting across the solar system. Others said it was the remnant of an ancient civilization, a dying machine still performing its final programmed task. A few even connected it to myth, suggesting ancient cultures might have seen this same object before, leaving behind records disguised as legends. And while scientists tried to steer the conversation back to reality, something strange was happening inside the labs too. The people studying the comet started to feel like they were being studied back. It sounds crazy, doesn't it? But picture it. You're sitting in a dark observatory at 3 a.m., watching a light billions of kilometers away that pulses at perfect intervals, as if waiting for acknowledgement. The silence between those pulses begins to feel heavy, intentional, like it's asking a question you can't quite understand. Some researchers joke that 3i Atlas was blinking at them, not signaling, but acknowledging attention. Others stopped laughing when the pulses began to change. Around October 27th, the pulse interval shifted by exactly 0.03 seconds. A tiny change, practically invisible, except to the people who had been watching it for weeks. To them, it was like hearing a familiar song suddenly skip a beat. That small shift meant one of two things. Either the comet's rotation was changing, or the mechanism driving the rhythm was reacting to something. What could it possibly be reacting to? One theory came from an unlikely source. A graduate student in Toronto named Alia Rahman. She'd been comparing the timing of 3i Atlas's pulses to the activity of the sun. Flares, magnetic field changes, radiation spikes. And what she found stunned the community. Each pulse, every single one, occurred within minutes of fluctuations in solar wind density. It was as though 3i Atlas knew when. The sun was breathing. Solar. Wind is unpredictable, a constant stream of charged particles racing outward at hundreds of kilometers per second. When it fluctuates, it causes auroras on Earth, radiation spikes on satellites, and turbulence throughout the solar system. But the idea that a comet could sense that and respond in kind, that was new. That was impossible. And yet there it was. Data lined up in perfect rhythm. Sun breathes, comet answers, over and over again. By now, journalists had caught wind of the anomaly. Headlines began to appear. The comet that beats like a heart. 3i Atlas, alive or machine? NASA's silent data on the pulsing visitor. People wanted answers. Governments wanted answers. But the truth was no one had them. The object defied classification. Every time the scientists thought they understood it, it changed again, as though staying one step ahead, keeping them chasing its mystery. And just as things began to settle into routine, just as the rhythm became part of the background hum of the solar system, something happened that no one expected. On November 3rd, the pulse stopped. Completely. The comet fell silent. For the first time in 2 months, 3i Atlas emitted no measurable light variation, no venting pattern, no heartbeat. It was as though it had gone dark or gone dormant. The same night, a coronal mass ejection, a giant burst of plasma from the sun, swept through space, passing near the comet's trajectory. When the wave cleared, 3i Atlas was gone from visible tracking. Vanished. The world held its breath. Telescopes swept the skies looking for a trace. It took 3 days before someone in Hawaii spotted it again. Faint, dim, but still moving. And when they did, the data revealed something no one could explain. The pulse was back. But now it wasn't 4 hours. It was 3 hours and 39 minutes, a perfect acceleration, a new rhythm, as if it had woken up and recalibrated itself. One of the lead astronomers wrote in his log that night, "If it's natural, it's the most intelligent rock we've ever seen, and if it's not, then it's trying to tell us something." And so began the most secretive phase of the investigation, one that would move from public observatories into private labs, military sensors, and classified data vaults. Because whatever 3i Atlas was, it wasn't done, it was just getting started. The night the pulse stopped, the observatories fell quiet. Not in the literal sense. Computers still hummed, data still streamed, telescopes still turned. But there was a silence that hung in the air, heavy and unnatural. For weeks, the rhythm of 3i Atlas had become a heartbeat of the scientific community. 4 hours on the dot, a living pulse echoing through the data feeds. Then suddenly, nothing. Flatline. At first, everyone assumed it was a technical failure, maybe a calibration glitch, maybe interference from the solar storm that had erupted earlier that day. The sun had released a coronal mass ejection, a storm of plasma so massive that it disrupted satellites and painted the skies of Earth with auroras as far south as Texas. So, when 3i Atlas's signal vanished, the timing made sense. It was logical. But logic only lasted a few hours. Because when the sun's radiation wave cleared, the comet should have reappeared. Brighter even, since the energy could have heated it up. But when the instruments came back online, The region of sky where 3i Atlas was supposed to be was empty. No reflection, no outgassing, no light, just void. To most of the world, it was a footnote. Comet disappears during solar storm. But to those who had been tracking it, the teams in Spain, Chile, and Hawaii, it was like losing a patient mid-surgery. They didn't sleep. They kept their telescopes pointed at the coordinates night after night, searching for even a whisper of movement. 3 nights later, at 2:17 a.m., Hawaiian Standard Time, a faint blip appeared, fainter than before, moving at the same trajectory, same speed, same everything. 3i Atlas was back, but something had changed. When they reanalyzed the data, they noticed the first anomaly. The comet's brightness curve wasn't just dimmer, it was cleaner. The noise, the random flickers from dust and debris, were gone. It was as though the object had shed something. And when the pulse resumed, it wasn't the same rhythm. It was faster, 3 hours and 39 minutes. The difference was so precise, so mechanical, that even the most skeptical scientists went pale. Rotation alone couldn't explain it. You don't just increase spin like that without an external force. To speed up by that much would require something, a torque, a push, a deliberate correction. Something had interacted with it. The data from that blackout window, those 72 hours of silence, became the most scrutinized dataset in modern astronomy. Observatories shared their logs, comparing timestamps, radiation readings, magnetic flux, every scrap of telemetry. What they found only deepened the mystery. During those missing days, at least 5 independent observatories recorded brief electromagnetic bursts, high-frequency spikes lasting milliseconds, originating from the same coordinates where 3i Atlas should have been. The bursts weren't random. They occurred in intervals matching the comet's pre-blackout pulse rate. It was as if the object had gone dark visually, but was still talking, just in another wavelength. Now, scientists are cautious with words like signal. They prefer terms like narrowband emission or localized fluctuation. But the truth is, no one could explain it. The bursts didn't match cosmic rays, radio interference, or solar background noise. They were too narrow, too clean. Someone at NASA, whose name never appeared in any official report, described them privately as digital whispers. Then, something even stranger emerged. The bursts weren't identical. Each carried subtle variations, minuscule changes in spacing and amplitude. When those patterns were plotted on a frequency map, they formed a sequence of ratios that corresponded almost perfectly to prime numbers. 2, 3, 5, 7, 11. Natural objects don't count. Machines do. Minds do. When that leaked to the public, it set the internet on fire. For the first time in decades, words like first contact trended globally. Theories bloomed faster than facts. Some people believed the object had absorbed energy from the sun, charging up before resuming its journey. Others thought it had hidden behind solar radiation deliberately, as if cloaking itself from observation. But inside NASA and ESA, the mood wasn't excitement. It was unease, because there was another layer to the data no one had mentioned publicly, one that made everything far more complicated and far more dangerous. When the comet reappeared, its trajectory had shifted by 0.04 degrees. That sounds small, but over interplanetary distances, that's massive. It was no longer following the same gravitational curve. Something had altered its course mid-flight, and here's the part that left even the most seasoned orbital analysts speechless. The new trajectory wasn't random. It was cleaner, more stable, almost corrected, as if someone, or something, had steered it. A private communication between ESA and NASA, leaked weeks later, described the change in hauntingly simple terms. Observed deviation consistent with active navigation. Source of impulse unknown. Those 5 words, source of impulse unknown, became the heart of the growing storm. If 3i Atlas had maneuvered, even slightly, it couldn't be a comet. No natural process could account for a controlled course correction in deep space. That's when agencies started locking things down. Data that had once been public suddenly disappeared. Servers hosting telescope feeds were restricted, and within days the discussion went from open science to classified research. Publicly, they said the data was being recalibrated. Privately, insiders were told not to discuss unverified anomalies. But the truth leaked anyway, because curiosity always finds a way. It started with an astronomer from Chile named Dr. Luis Mendez, who posted a vague message on social media before deleting it hours later. It read, "We are not watching it anymore. It's watching us." The post went viral before vanishing, but the words stuck. What did he mean by that? Was it metaphorical, a poetic expression of awe, or literal? We might never know, because soon after, Mendez went silent. His colleagues said he took leave for personal reasons. But whispers in the community told a different story, that he'd been visited by government officials who asked him to hand over his data. The mystery deepened further when a team in Italy, analyzing magnetic field readings from that same period, noticed something that shouldn't have been there, a faint but structured oscillation in Earth's upper ionosphere, synchronized perfectly with the bursts from 3I Atlas. Something out there had rippled through the magnetic fabric of our planet. Now, was it coincidence? Maybe, or maybe for the first time, humanity had brushed against something aware. When scientists tried to trace the timing of the bursts backward, to triangulate their origin more precisely, they noticed one last disturbing detail. The final burst, before visual contact was re-established, didn't point directly toward Earth, but toward the Sun. The same direction the comet's impossible jet had pointed all along, almost as if it was answering something we hadn't heard yet. And as the world argued, as governments tightened their grip on data, and as amateur astronomers kept watching, one truth became undeniable. 3I Atlas was no longer just an interstellar visitor. It was an event. What none of them knew yet was that the real revelation hadn't even begun, because within days, those same pulses would begin appearing, not from the comet, but from somewhere far closer. Something above Earth had started to echo them. When the first echo arrived, nobody recognized it for what it was. It came through a monitoring station in northern Norway, a lonely outpost where long-range radar dishes sweep the sky for solar activity and orbital debris. At 0411 UTC, a technician named Eva Johansson saw a narrow spike appear on her screen. It looked like a simple transmission bounce, maybe a satellite ping, nothing unusual. She logged it, filed the report, and went back to her coffee. 12 minutes later, the same spike appeared again. Identical frequency, identical duration. 12 minutes. That number sent a chill down her spine, because 12 minutes was 1/20th of the 3-hour and 39-minute pulse now associated with 3I Atlas. At first, she thought she was imagining the connection. The comet was billions of kilometers away. No signal from that distance could possibly be repeating in low Earth orbit. But curiosity is a dangerous thing for people who work with data. Eva cross-checked the timestamp against the global astronomy feed just to humor herself. The results made her forget to breathe. The echo had arrived exactly when 3I Atlas would have completed its next pulse, if the pulse was still propagating outward. It was as if the rhythm had hit the edge of the solar system and bounced back. She sent the file to the European Space Agency. Within hours, the phone in her lab wouldn't stop ringing. By dawn, confirmation was pouring in from every continent. Chile, Japan, Australia, different instruments, different systems, all picking up the same narrowband burst. The signal wasn't strong, but it was structured. And worst of all, it wasn't coming from deep space anymore. Triangulation placed its origins somewhere between 35,000 and 40,000 kilometers above Earth, right around geostationary orbit. That's the highway where our communications satellites live. If the signal was artificial, it was either coming from one of our own machines or from something parked quietly among them. Governments scrambled. The US Space Force issued a low-key advisory to satellite operators, citing unexpected narrowband interference. ESA began reviewing telemetry for every known satellite. Russia and China went silent. The public never heard about the advisory, at least not at first, but astronomers talk. And soon, screenshots leaked. The online forums exploded again. They're here. The comet left a probe. The signal came home. For scientists still clinging to reason, the explanation had to be mundane. Maybe the pulses were reflections, an echo bouncing off Earth's magnetosphere, or from one of our thousands of defunct satellites. Maybe it was atmospheric scattering, anything but intelligence, except reflections fade. This one persisted. Over the next 72 hours, the echo repeated 23 times, each precisely 12 minutes apart, each carrying a faint modulation buried in its tail, a subtle chirp that no natural reflection could produce. It was as though the signal was listening to itself, adjusting its timing every cycle, narrowing the gap between bursts by fractions of a second. That pattern of refinement, error correction, is something humans invented for communication networks. And here it was, unfolding in the sky. Back at ESA headquarters, analysts began comparing the echo's waveform to the original 3i Atlas pulses. When they overlaid the two, they aligned almost perfectly, except for one eerie difference. The echo's amplitude envelope had been mirrored. In audio terms, it was a reversed waveform, the same message played backward. It wasn't a reply, it was a reflection with intent. When news of the mirror signature reached NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory, panic met fascination. They cross-checked with data from the Deep Space Network, the massive radio antennas used to talk to Mars rovers and Voyager probes. And sure enough, faint harmonics matching the echo's frequency were appearing in their logs too, delayed by minutes, as if rippling through the fabric of the magnetosphere. Something up there was resonating with 3i Atlas. At first, they tried to identify a culprit among known satellites. Could it be one of the decommissioned communications birds drifting in the Clark Belt? Thousands of them orbit up there. Metal shells, dead transmitters, silent relics. If one had malfunctioned, it might emit periodic noise. But when the data from the US Space Command satellite catalog came back, the coordinates didn't match any registered object. The source sat in an orbital slot, officially empty. Theories multiplied. Maybe a fragment of 3i Atlas had broken off during the blackout and somehow decelerated toward Earth, captured by our planet's gravity like a falling ember. Impossible, yes. But then again, so was everything about this visitor. NASA prepared an observation campaign. They redirected the Goldstone deep space antenna and several optical telescopes to scan the region. For 3 days they found nothing. Then, on the 4th night, a flash. A tiny glint moved against the darkness. Too small for a satellite, too slow for debris. It was metallic, roughly spherical, perhaps 20 meters across, tumbling gently, reflecting sunlight like a mirror. And right on schedule, 12 minutes after each flash, came another echo. That was enough. Official channels labeled it Object YJ47. Privately, everyone called it the Echo. The discovery never made front-page news. Instead, governments quietly tightened radio regulations. Amateur astronomers who claimed to capture the flashes found their social media posts throttled or deleted. Still, screenshots leaked, as they always do, and speculation caught fire again. Was the Echo a fragment of 3i Atlas? A probe it released? A relay station? Or something even stranger, an artifact deliberately mirroring signals to study us? Inside the agencies, a small interdisciplinary team formed, a mix of astrophysicists, linguists, and cryptographers, tasked with analyzing the pulse code. They weren't told much, only that the source might represent non-terrestrial engineering. For days, they listened. They stripped the signal into raw binary, seeking meaning in the noise. Most saw chaos, but one of them, a linguist named Dr. Haruki Imai, noticed something others missed. The chirp variations at the end of each 12-minute burst weren't random. They followed an ascending mathematical series that matched the rotation frequencies of Jupiter's magnetic field. The implication was staggering. The pattern wasn't just acknowledging Earth. It was referencing the broader solar system, as if mapping its environment, like a visitor checking its coordinates. The deeper they dug, the more deliberate it looked. Then suddenly, after 23 days of steady rhythm, the echoes changed tone. The frequency dropped by 3%. The chirps vanished. And a final burst came through, longer, clearer, and unmistakably structured. When they converted the waveform into a visual spectrogram, it showed a series of bright bands, short, medium, long, repeating 3 times. To human eyes, it resembled a triangle pointing upward. A message? A symbol or coincidence? Nobody could agree. But the next day, telescopes caught something else. 3i Atlas itself, far beyond Mars now, emitted a massive outburst, its brightest yet, followed by silence. And at the exact same moment, the echo in Earth's orbit went dark. It was as if the two had completed a transaction. Whatever passed between them, the exchange was over. But the consequences were only beginning. Because just weeks later, instruments across the world, magnetometers, seismic sensors, even civilian electronics, would start picking up faint rhythmic interference. The same intervals, the same beat, as if the pulse had found a new home inside our planet. It began with the smallest of glitches, the kind you'd never notice unless you were looking for them. In Iceland, seismographs recorded faint rhythmic tremors, too regular to be tectonic, too soft to be an earthquake. In Japan, magnetometers started picking up an oscillating signal at the edge of their sensitivity range, a rise and fall every 3 hours and 39 minutes, same as 3i Atlas. At first, no one connected the dots. The world had moved on, at least officially. The comet was now little more than a fading memory drifting toward the outer solar system. NASA's statements were calm and deliberate. The object has entered a quiescent phase. No further anomalies observed. But in back rooms and quiet labs, a few people knew better. Because every time that exact interval ticked by, instruments around the planet twitched, like a ghostly heartbeat rippling through Earth itself. The first to notice was Dr. Raj Patel, a geophysicist at Caltech. He'd been running a test on subterranean vibration sensors meant to track volcanic activity. When he played back a week of data, he found a repeating spike in the frequency range between 0.5 and 1 Hz. Too slow for machinery, too steady for seismic noise. He filtered the data, then filtered it again. No matter what he did, the pulse remained. 3 hours, 39 minutes. Same rhythm. He thought it was a sensor malfunction until he contacted a colleague at the European Space Agency who had been quietly monitoring geomagnetic fluctuations ever since the 3i Atlas blackout. The European data showed the exact same pattern. It wasn't the instruments, it was the planet. Within days, reports poured in from around the world. Argentina, persistent rhythmic anomaly in local magnetometer. India, repeating seismic waveform, non-tectonic. Global in scale. Antarctica, polar magnetics oscillating with unidentified periodicity, all synchronized. All global. Some joked that Earth had developed a pulse. Others weren't laughing. Because when you zoomed out, when you plotted every anomaly on a global map, the rhythm wasn't uniform. It seemed to move. The peak intensity drifted slowly across latitudes, following the daylight line from east to west. It was as though something deep inside the Earth was responding to the sun. At first, no one wanted to say the obvious. The word itself hung in every conversation but never crossed anyone's lips. Resonance. When a system vibrates in sympathy with an external force, that's resonance. It's how a singer can shatter glass, or how a bridge can collapse if a marching rhythm matches its natural frequency. And if something, anything, had tuned into the natural frequency of the Earth's magnetic core, the consequences could be beyond comprehension. So the question wasn't what was happening, it was who or what had caused it. Back at ESA, Dr. Haruki Imai, the linguist who had decoded the echo's final message, was called into a private session. The satellite data showed faint electromagnetic emissions still echoing from the same orbital coordinates where the object had once been. Weak, nearly invisible, but persistent, like a hum. They called it the residual. It wasn't sending messages anymore. It was broadcasting a tone. The tone matched the frequency of Earth's own magnetic oscillation. The Schumann resonance, but modulated at that same impossible 3 hour and 39-minute interval. When the audio was sped up to human hearing, range and played through speakers, it produced an unsettling sound, a low, hollow beat, almost like a giant heart buried miles beneath the crust. The few who heard it described the same feeling, unease, fascination, and a strange sense that the sound was aware. Meanwhile, public agencies scrambled to stay ahead of rumors. Amateur radio operators were already posting about mysterious repeating tones interfering with their transmissions. On TikTok and Reddit, conspiracy videos went viral claiming that Earth was sinking with the alien visitor. NASA's PR department denied it all, but inside Mission Control, something was undeniable. The echo's coordinates had begun to drift, ever so slightly, toward Earth. The change was minute, barely measurable, but it was happening. One of the senior analysts, Dr. Marisol Vega, ran the orbital data 5 times. Every time, the numbers told the same story. The echo wasn't dead debris. It was descending, not fast enough to burn up, not random enough to call it decay, a slow, deliberate arc. If it continued at that rate, it would intersect Earth's atmosphere in exactly 87 days. They had no idea what would happen then, if it would disintegrate, land, or vanish. But one thing was certain, it wasn't drifting, it was aiming. Theories exploded behind closed doors. Was the echo following gravitational pull? Was it reacting to Earth's magnetic field? Or the pulse itself? Some whispered it was responding to something inside Earth, because that rhythm, the one that began as a whisper in seismic charts, was growing stronger. Sensitive equipment now picked it up clearly. The signal-to-noise ratio had increased tenfold in just 2 weeks. It wasn't fading, it was amplifying. And then, something happened that turned fear into awe. At 0219 UTC, the same Norwegian station that had first detected the echo months earlier picked up a new burst. Not a pulse this time, a pattern, a sequence of tones rising and falling in complex intervals, lasting almost 2 minutes. When analysts graphed it visually, the shape matched the spectrogram triangle from before, the same 3 bright bands. But this time, inside the triangle, a faint curve appeared. A spiral. Some called it coincidence. Others called it the signature. Whatever it was, it meant one thing. The communication hadn't ended. It had just moved home, because the next morning, at 8 a.m. Eastern Time, magnetometers across the world recorded a synchronized surge, the strongest yet. And for the first time ever, human ears could hear it without instruments. A deep, subsonic rumble rolled through the air, vibrating windows, rattling water glasses, humming through concrete. It lasted only 15 seconds. When it ended, every screen at ESA flickered. The signal vanished, and in its place, for exactly 1 frame, a visual spike appeared, a line of binary digits that would later be translated to a simple, chilling phrase, "Hello again." The message appeared only once, a single frame, invisible to the naked eye, buried deep inside the magnetic data stream. But it was there, "Hello again." 2 words that would change everything. The moment the anomaly appeared, every system at the European Space Agency froze. Automated firewalls kicked in, isolating the terminals that had received the feed. Operators stared in disbelief as the characters decoded on-screen, pixel by pixel, against a background of static. For 10 full seconds, nobody moved. Then, almost on instinct, someone reached over and yanked the power cable. When the servers came back online, the frame was gone. Officially, nothing had happened. The report filed at 0847 UTC described it as a visual artifact resulting from binary misalignment during data compression. But the engineers knew better. They'd been collecting this kind of data their whole lives. This wasn't compression noise. It was deliberate. The message was encoded in binary with perfect checksum integrity. No corruption, no glitch. Someone had placed it there. And that was the moment the story stopped being a scientific curiosity and became a global security event. Within hours, encrypted communications flew between ESA, NASA, and the US Cyber Command. The question wasn't what the message meant, it was where it came from. Because the sensors that picked up the burst weren't directed at the sky. They were pointed inward, monitoring Earth's own magnetic field. The hello again didn't come from space. It came from beneath us. When that detail reached Washington and Geneva, entire departments went dark. Analysts were pulled off other projects. A new task force formed, officially named Project Meridian, though internally it had another name, the Listening Room. Their mission was simple but terrifying, to determine whether the signal was natural, artificial, or something in between. For the first 48 hours, data scientists combed through every byte. The message's binary string showed an eerie symmetry. 2 halves mirrored perfectly, as though the text had been reflected across a central axis. The top half spelled "hello again." The bottom half, when reversed, translated to a sequence of ASCII characters that, when decoded, produced 3 numbers: 3, 1, and Atlas, the name of the comet. Coincidence? Impossible. Still, the official line held steady. The message didn't exist. The public heard nothing. Only a handful of scientists, scattered across 3 continents, knew the truth. And every one of them was told the same thing. You didn't see it. But secrets like this don't stay buried long. By the 3rd day, the anomaly leaked. An anonymous post appeared on an obscure data analysis forum claiming to have found a coded greeting inside ESA's magnetic field feed. Within hours, the post vanished, but not before someone screenshotted it. The image spread like wildfire, bouncing from private Discord servers to Reddit to encrypted Telegram channels. Hello again. 2 words. Countless theories. Some said it was a government psyop, a secret communication test disguised as an alien mystery. Others believed the Echo, the small metallic sphere in orbit, had finally transmitted a reply. But the few who understood the timing saw something far stranger. The message had appeared exactly at the midpoint between two pulses of the Earth's resonance. Not before, not after, in between, like an interruption. That precision haunted the people at Project Meridian. If the timing was intentional, it implied intelligence, not in the sense of emotional consciousness, but calculation. The signal had chosen its moment. Over the next week, new readings began to surface. Small, localized bursts of magnetism were detected across the planet. In Siberia, in the deserts of Nevada, in the deep Pacific. Each lasted less than half a second, too faint to register on civilian instruments, but perfectly synchronized with the global pulse. It was as if the planet itself had started to speak in Morse code. One Meridian analyst described it in his notes. If it's real, it's like listening to a heart murmur in a sleeping giant. If it's not, then our instruments are dreaming. Meanwhile, the Echo, that silent sphere in orbit, began moving again. After weeks of drifting, its altitude dropped by another 60 kilometers. Tiny thruster-like flashes were detected, too brief to photograph clearly but unmistakable in the telemetry. Whatever was inside that sphere was still active. NASA issued a quiet update to its internal staff, marked Level 5, confidential. Echo object has reinitiated low-energy correction maneuvers. Trajectory suggests re-entry window possible within 60-80 days. Continuous monitoring required. To the scientists of Project Meridian, it wasn't just re-entry. It felt like a return, as one of them whispered during a late-night session. What if it's not coming down? What if it's coming back to finish the conversation? For the first time, multiple government agencies started coordinating their ground sensors. Arrays usually used to track submarines and seismic events were reprogrammed to listen for low-frequency oscillations. Undersea microphones in the Pacific began picking up subtle hums, rhythmic, harmonic, faintly musical. When those recordings were played through a spectrograph, they showed something haunting, a spiral pattern, identical to the one inside the triangular waveform from the original signal. Whatever this phenomenon was, it was consistent, persistent, and it was now inside our world. And then, another anomaly. At 03:33 a.m. on a cold November morning, magnetometers in the Arctic registered a surge, a pulse 20 times stronger than any before it. When analysts checked the direction, they expected to see the usual source lines tracing along magnetic north. But they didn't. The source was deep, 2,800 kilometers beneath the surface, near the edge of Earth's outer core. For the first time in recorded history, something down there had moved. The seismic signature didn't match any known tectonic shift. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't volcanic activity. It was a single sharp vibration, followed by a long, fading echo that rippled through the mantle like a whisper through water. That's when Project Meridian's director made the call no one wanted to hear. From this point on, it's not extraterrestrial research. It's containment. But you can't contain a planet because within 24 hours, satellites began detecting faint electromagnetic ripples pulsing outward, from inside Earth, toward the direction of 3I Atlas. Whatever this was, the planet had just answered, and far beyond Mars in the cold and endless dark, 3I Atlas flared again, one blinding burst of light, a final pulse like a response carried across the void. When the light from 3I Atlas flared again, so bright that even backyard telescopes caught the glint, every sensor on Earth twitched. It wasn't just electromagnetic noise this time. It was a full-spectrum surge that rippled through every frequency band used for communication. For exactly 11 seconds, radios hissed, GPS units glitched, and aircraft radar screens briefly went blank. The world never knew, because within minutes, the highest levels of government activated a protocol that didn't officially exist, the Containment Directive. It wasn't a single nation's decision. It was collective panic disguised as cooperation. Satellite feeds were encrypted. Observatories received maintenance blackouts, and data pipelines feeding open-source research networks went offline for system upgrades. The order spread quietly through embassies, research councils, and defense ministries. No public discussion, no data release, no speculation. On paper, the goal was stability, keep markets calm. prevent hysteria. In practice, it was about control, because for the first time in human history, the planet itself seemed to be responding to something beyond it. Project Meridian, until then an obscure scientific task force, suddenly found itself at the center of a global emergency. Overnight, its offices in Geneva transformed into a fortress of screens and sealed doors. Access required two clearances: Scientific Level 7 and Strategic Black. Inside, analysts mapped the global resonance patterns pulsing through the Earth's core. Every cycle matched the 3-hour and 39-minute interval, but the amplitude was growing. At 0210 UTC, the amplitude peaked again, then divided. Instead of a single global pulse, there were now 3 overlapping waves. Each one carried a slightly different signature, like voices speaking in harmony. No one could explain it. Some thought the waves represented hemispheric resonances: north, south, and equatorial. Others whispered that something was tuning the planet. Dr. Vega, now chief coordinator for Meridian's orbital division, said it best in her briefing: "It's as if Earth is learning to talk back." The directive's first stage focused on suppression. Internet monitoring teams flagged any social media posts mentioning Earth hum, magnetic heartbeat, or comet echo. Video platforms were quietly asked to throttle uploads from amateur astronomers. A handful of scientists who tried to publish data saw their papers disappear into administrative limbo, but containment was already slipping. Civilian pilots began reporting intermittent compass drift. Power grid operators in Canada and Scandinavia noticed voltage fluctuations that followed the same rhythm. Deep-sea fiber cables registered repeating pressure anomalies, like microtides pulsing through the ocean floor. Something deep and ancient was stirring, and humanity's infrastructure was feeling it first. By mid-December, the directive escalated to Stage 2, preparation. Each major power was assigned a resonance mitigation zone. Giant arrays of magnetometers and undersea sensors were deployed under the guise of scientific collaboration. Satellites were repurposed to watch the echo's descent path. Quietly, bunkers that had once been designed for nuclear war were re-equipped with geophysical monitoring hardware. Still, no one said the word contact, not yet. Inside Meridian, the scientists noticed something chilling. The more they tried to block or jam the planetary pulse, using magnetic damping fields, ionospheric heaters, even power grid modulation, the stronger the response became. It was as if the interference was feeding the phenomenon, not stopping it. One engineer compared it to feedback in an audio system. "We built a microphone inside a speaker. Now the room's starting to scream, and scream it did." At 0604 UTC on December 18th, a coordinated surge hit the northern hemisphere. It was brief, just 30 seconds, but powerful enough to trip power stations from Alaska to Eastern Europe. Air traffic control reported simultaneous radar loss across multiple sectors. In the silence that followed, magnetometers registered a single, perfect triangle waveform, 3 sharp peaks, evenly spaced, the same symbol that had appeared in the echo's final transmission. When the data reached Meridian's command center, nobody spoke for a full minute. Then Dr. Patel, voice trembling, broke the silence. "It's not answering us, it's synchronizing with us." That realization changed everything. Stage 3 of the directive began before dawn. Nations that hadn't agreed on anything for decades suddenly shared one goal: find the source. Military satellites switched to deep penetration scanning modes usually reserved for detecting nuclear tests. Subsurface imaging networks lit up with activity. What they found defied logic. Near the equatorial Pacific, roughly 3,000 kilometers beneath the surface, sensors detected a dense metallic anomaly the size of a city. It wasn't moving, but it was humming, perfectly. In phase with the planetary pulse, it wasn't there 6 months earlier. Official story called it a mantle discontinuity artifact. The classified report called it what everyone feared: an object. No drilling rig could reach it. No probe could survive that depth. But its resonance was spreading upward through the mantle, like heat through water. And with each pulse, the echo in orbit adjusted its descent, almost as if the two were coordinating. Now, for the first time, the question was no longer whether we were alone. The question was how long it had been here. And as midnight fell on December 19th, seismographs around the world recorded a new sound, a double beat. The pulse had split again, two rhythms, two hearts, one above, one below, and somewhere between them, humanity, caught in the static of an unfinished conversation. The first clear image arrived as a ghost, white noise molded into shape by algorithms desperate for meaning. On a monitor inside Project Meridian's subterranean command hall, a rotating 3D model slowly came into focus, a massive, symmetrical form buried nearly 3,000 kilometers beneath the Pacific Basin, suspended within the molten mantle like an artifact trapped in amber. At that depth, nothing man-made could exist. Temperatures reached 4,000 degrees Celsius, pressures high enough to crush steel into liquid. Yet there it was, geometrically perfect. Its outline wasn't random, it was triangular. 3 long ridges joined at luminous vertices, each emitting faint electromagnetic fluctuations precisely in sync with Earth's global pulse. Dr. Vega leaned closer to the screen. "It's not just reflecting the resonance," she whispered. "It's driving it." The object measured roughly 30 kilometers across, hollow at its center. Modeling suggested a shell of ultra-dense material, denser than iron, lighter than tungsten, something no mineral database could identify. When seismic waves passed through it, they slowed, then bent, as if refracted by design. No one could explain how it had gotten there. If it had fallen from space, the impact would have vaporized continents. If it had risen from below, it would have left fissures miles wide. There were no scars, no signs of intrusion, only the presence itself, ancient and impossibly intact. Meridian analysts tried to simulate its origin. Every model failed. Every timeline broke. The equations kept looping back on themselves, producing the same impossible output. Object predates crust formation. That single phrase, repeated across 10 independent analyses, sent shivers through the command team. Whatever this thing was, it might have been here before the Earth solidified. The containment directive elevated to stage 4. A new cover story went public. A deep mantle mineral anomaly discovered during oceanic research. Meanwhile, behind sealed doors, military satellites began retasking. Their mission: watch the echo, because as the data came in, one correlation stood out. Every time the buried object pulsed, the echo in orbit adjusted its trajectory ever so slightly, as though the two were conversing through the planet itself. By the 3rd week of December, the descent was visible even in civilian tracking. The sphere was now only 28,000 kilometers up. Its speed was constant, not orbital decay, not drag, but deliberate propulsion. Tiny bursts of light flared along its surface at perfectly timed intervals. Each flash matched the beat from below. Inside Meridian, panic coexisted with wonder. The pulse was now global, audible in low-frequency recordings, visible in oscillating auroras that shimmered at impossible latitudes. Fishermen in the Pacific reported the sea breathing, rising and falling in rhythmic microtides. Power grids from Manila to San Francisco flickered in unison. Still, the public explanation held: solar interference. But the people closest to the data knew the pattern was too precise. One evening, Dr. Patel played the global readings through an audio filter, converting the magnetic waves into sound. What emerged was a deep, harmonious chord, 3 tones intertwining, slowly modulating toward a single pitch. When he inverted the frequencies, mapping them onto a spectrogram, the pattern formed something unmistakable, a spiral nested inside a triangle. The same symbol again. It appeared everywhere now, on seismic prints, in satellite telemetry, even in the flicker rhythm of the echo's light. The interpretation was impossible to ignore. Whatever these two objects were, they shared a design language, a code older than humanity, etched into matter itself. And then the first response came from the deep. Seismographs across the Pacific Rim registered a sharp tremor, but it wasn't tectonic. It started simultaneously along a 1,000-kilometer arc, as if a circular wave had rippled outward from one point near the equator. For 13 seconds, the ocean floor sang. Submersible microphones picked up a tone. Clear, sustained, too pure to be geological. When analysts slowed it down, the waveform revealed modulation, binary bursts hidden within the resonance. Translated, the first sequence spelled 3 letters, ARC. No one could agree on what it meant. Archive? Arc? Arc of something larger? The following day, the echo fired a visible burst of plasma. altering course one final time, straight toward the coordinates of the anomaly beneath the Pacific. At that exact moment, every compass on Earth drifted east by 4 degrees, stayed there for a heartbeat, then snapped back. Birds changed migration paths mid-flight. Whales breached for no reason, surfacing in synchronized waves across 3 oceans. The planet was answering itself. In the Meridian control room, Dr. Vega whispered the thought everyone had been avoiding. What if this isn't invasion or contact? What if it's activation? Silence followed. Outside, the sky over the Pacific shimmered faintly green, an aurora where no aurora should exist. And then, for the first time in weeks, the pulse stopped. The monitors went flat. No resonance, no heartbeat. Nothing. But deep below, the seismic quiet wasn't peace. It was inhalation. Because 2 hours later, instruments detected the slow build of pressure beneath the ocean floor. Whatever slept down there had drawn its first breath. It began so subtly that no one on the surface noticed. At 02:46 UTC, instruments moored to the seafloor in the central Pacific registered a pressure spike that didn't fit any model. For 10 seconds, the ocean pressed upward, as though the water itself were taking a single, immense breath. At the same moment, satellites detected a circular shimmer across the sea, an invisible ripple stretching nearly 600 kilometers wide. It wasn't wind or current or temperature. It was displacement. Something beneath the crust had moved. Inside Project Meridian's command chamber, a wall of monitors filled with jagged red traces. Dr. Vega stared at the readings, then at the globe on the central screen. "That's not an earthquake," she said. "That's expansion." Across the Pacific, buoys bobbed higher than expected. Oceanographers in Japan and Hawaii reported an inexplicable microtide, 20 centimeters in amplitude, perfectly synchronized, appearing simultaneously across thousands of kilometers. Even stranger, the wave traveled outward in every direction, as if centered on a single heartbeat below the sea. When the data arrived in Geneva, it formed a perfect circle, a pulse, from directly above the coordinates of the buried object. Within an hour, coastal stations from Chile to New Zealand began hearing it. Not as vibration through rock, but as sound. Low, subsonic, steady. The ocean was humming. Dr. Patel compared recordings from 4 continents and realized each was slightly out of phase, like notes in a chord. When he aligned them, the tones fused into a single harmonic. Played through speakers, it sounded like the breath of a colossal bellows. Inhale, exhale, inhale. "It's resonating with the atmosphere now," he whispered. "The ocean's become a speaker." By dawn, the effect reached the skies. Weather satellites reported concentric cloud spirals forming spontaneously over the central Pacific, perfectly round, rotating in opposite directions at different altitudes. Meteorologists called them lens storms, a term they'd never needed before. The world's news outlets noticed the anomaly, of course. Footage of 2 vast circular storm systems moving in tandem filled the internet. Official explanations, thermal inversion, El Niño, data error, poured out within hours. But independent researchers overlaid the storm rotation period on the global magnetic pulse and discovered the impossible. Both cycled at exactly 3 hours 39 minutes. The heartbeat had reached the weather. Inside Meridian, the containment directive entered its quietest and most desperate phase. Observation only. No more interference attempts. Every previous disruption had strengthened the phenomenon, as if resistance itself was part of the feedback loop. So the scientists watched. They watched as the storm's eye began to glow faintly at night, a turquoise halo visible even from the coast of California. They watched buoys record minute increases in ocean temperature, 0.5 degree, then 1, then 2. They watched as migratory fish began clustering around the epicenter, forming swirling schools that mirrored the spiral above. Nature, it seemed, was listening. Then came the whisper through the seafloor cables, a tremor too orderly to be tectonic, repeating like code. Analysts converted the vibration pattern into binary. The translation was short but unmistakable. A WAKE Dr. Vega read it twice before speaking. "It's the same syntax as before, same checksum, same source," she looked at Patel. "If this is communication, it's self-referential. It's aware of its own state." Outside, the world began to feel the change without understanding it. Compass headings drifted again. Radio signals curved strangely over the horizon. as though the atmosphere had thickened. Mariners reported seeing lights below the water, soft, steady glows that traced triangles across the depths before fading. Governments called for calm. Social media called it the breathing sea. Back in the command hall, Meridian's sensors recorded a new phenomenon. Pressure waves rising through the mantle in a slow spiral, converging toward the surface. The pattern matched the geometry of the buried object exactly. "It's opening," Patel said quietly. No one answered. The room filled with the faint, rhythmic creak of metal as equipment trembled in sympathy with the pulse. Then, at precisely midnight local time on December 24th, the ocean stopped moving. The hum ceased. The storms froze in place, spinning but no longer advancing. For 30 seconds, the planet held its breath. In those 30 seconds, every magnetic compass on Earth pointed not north, but toward the Pacific. And then the sea exhaled, a column of water, perfectly cylindrical, perfectly vertical, rose 1/2 kilometer above the surface before collapsing back in silence. Satellites captured the image, a circle of still water glowing faintly from beneath, like a window into another world. When the light faded, the readings changed. The object's coordinates had shifted upward by nearly 200 meters. Whatever had slept below was moving toward the surface. Would you like me to continue with part 12? The rise of the arc, where the structure begins to reveal itself and the world's attempt at secrecy starts to fracture. For months it had spoken only in pulses, vibrations in the dark, mathematics carved into the magnetic field of the Earth. But in late December 2025, the language changed. The ocean itself began to move. What happened on that cold night over the Central Pacific would later be described as the quietest cataclysm in history. No explosion, no quake, only motion, steady, deliberate, impossible. Satellite constellations watching the region caught the first proof at 03:17 UTC, a pale ring of light rising through 5 kilometers of water. It wasn't bioluminescence, and it wasn't reflected moonlight. The spectrum showed metallic emission lines, nickel again, the same signature first seen in 3I Atlas. Below that halo, sonar arrays detected a structure coming up from the mantle, piercing the crust as easily as smoke through air. It wasn't a jagged mountain or volcanic dome. It was smooth, geometrically pure. 3 ridges converging toward a central spire. The shape matched Meridian's simulations of the buried object exactly. They named it the Arc. Across the world, the official story collapsed in real time. Fishermen filmed the glow. Commercial pilots saw the spiral storms from above. When the footage reached social media, governments could no longer hide behind maintenance outages and calibration notices. The containment directive fractured overnight. Within hours, the Pacific time zones filled with contradictory reports. Undersea eruption, classified military test, mirage. But the images told their own truth. Something was rising, and it was no mirage. Inside Project Meridian's bunker, the atmosphere shifted from control to witness. The instruments showed the pulse doubling in frequency, the planet's magnetic field bowing in resonance. Dr. Vega read the figures aloud, her voice barely steady. It's matching the planet's rotation rate now, synchronizing, like it's locking in. The team watched the live feed from orbital cameras, grainy grey frames showing an expanding circle of phosphorescent water. Then, for the briefest instant, the waves parted. A surface broke through. It wasn't stone. It wasn't metal as humans know it. It shimmered between states, liquid one moment, crystal in the next, an adaptive skin reflecting the night sky in impossible symmetry. Even through the static, the structure looked intentional. Narrator pauses, tone lowers. It rose only 20 meters before stopping, as if testing the air of a world that had long forgotten it. At that moment, every compass needle on Earth quivered. The global pulse ceased. In its place came a single sustained tone, deep enough to be felt more than heard. For 16 seconds, the entire magnetic field of the planet hummed in unison. Radio towers resonated. Skyscraper steel vibrated. And then the tone stopped, leaving a silence so complete that instruments flat-lined for nearly a minute. When data returned, the object at the surface emitted a narrow beam of light directly upward, through cloud and stratosphere, straight towards space. Observatories from Chile to South Africa confirmed it, a coherent column of ionized air extending into orbit. ending exactly where the echosphere had last been detected. The two signals, Earth and orbit, were linked again. In the days that followed, ocean currents around the structure reversed. The waters calmed, unnaturally smooth. Ships that approached within 50 kilometers lost all electronic guidance. Their instruments reduced to static. Pilots called the area the still circle. Meanwhile, scientists noticed another change. The Schumann resonance, the natural electromagnetic heartbeat of Earth, had shifted upward by precisely 0.04 Hertz. A small difference, yet planetary in scale. The planet's rhythm had changed tempo. No one could say whether it was damage or adaptation. By New Year's Eve 2025, half the world's telescopes were pointed at the Pacific. What they saw defied every expectation. The ark's surface had begun to pattern itself with lines, fine glowing traces etching into the material like veins of light. Three primary paths formed, converging at the spire's tip. When overlaid with orbital data, those paths aligned perfectly with the trajectories of 3I Atlas, the Echo, and Earth itself. Three bodies forming one geometrical conversation across space. Inside Meridian, Dr. Patel broke the silence. It's not a monument, it's a node, the word hung in the air. If the arc was a node, then somewhere out there were others. And the flare from 3I Atlas might have been a signal between them, a wake-up call across stellar distances. But before anyone could act, another burst appeared, not from the sky, not from the sea, but from deep beneath the ark's foundation, a rising swell of heat and magnetism, strong enough to trip power grids across the Pacific Rim. The arc was drawing energy, geothermal, magnetic, maybe both, and as it did, the glow at its base shifted color, from white-blue to a deep, pulsating amber. Whatever slept beneath the Pacific was no longer dreaming, it was remembering. For the first time since the discovery of 3I Atlas, the scientists of Project Meridian stopped asking what it was. They began to ask why it had chosen now to rise. When the arc rose from the Pacific, humanity thought it was seeing a single miracle. In truth, it was only the first note in a far larger composition. At 03 UTC on January 2nd, every long-range radio telescope on Earth caught the same anomaly. A faint harmonic oscillation pulsing once every 3 hours and 39 minutes. The tone wasn't random static, it carried structure, mathematical coherence, and most unnervingly, direction. The signal didn't radiate outward from the arc. It radiated through the planet, bending and re-emerging along precise geodesic paths. When analysts traced those trajectories, they converged on 12 points across the globe, mountain ranges, deserts, and deep ocean trenches, all equidistant by angular measure, 12 nodes. Each one began to hum. At first, the hum was barely measurable, a micro-vibration in magnetic sensors, a whisper in the ionosphere. But within hours it grew strong enough to register on civilian electronics. Amateur radio operators reported ghost transmissions, short bursts of perfect digital silence, bracketed by faint musical chords. Smartphones near coastal regions flickered, their screens flashing 3 words before rebooting: "We are online." Governments denied everything. News anchors blamed cyber attacks. Yet the pattern repeated every 3 hours and 39 minutes with atomic precision. Inside Project Meridian's bunker, Dr. Vega watched the holographic globe bloom with light as each node awakened. Chile, Siberia, the Sahara, Greenland's ice, the Indian Ocean. Each flare appeared, stabilized, and began transmitting toward the arc like neurons firing in a vast planetary brain. "It's forming a lattice," Vega murmured. "A communication web, Earth's own infrastructure." The realization hit them all at once. The arc wasn't only drawing energy, it was coordinating it. The planet's magnetic field, ocean currents, even atmospheric jet streams, each was subtly modulated, woven into a network whose architecture obeyed one geometry, the same triangular symmetry found in 3I Atlas's debris. If the arc was a node, the Earth itself was becoming the antenna. The first visual proof came from orbit. ESA's Sentinel array captured a low-light image showing faint auroral filaments connecting the nodes, lines of charged plasma stretching thousands of kilometers across night skies. To the human eye, they were invisible. Through infrared filters, they resembled threads of molten gold stitching continents together. Public reaction turned from curiosity to awe to unease. Pilots crossing the Atlantic saw thin ribbons of light beneath their aircraft. Travelers reported compasses rotating smoothly in full circles, always settling on the same azimuth, toward the Pacific Arc. The world's religions issued statements calling for calm. The stock markets called for explanations. None came. Within Meridian, communication with several remote stations began to fail. Their final transmissions all ended the same way: a burst of data compressed into an unreadable checksum, followed by a single timestamp precisely 3 seconds into the future. Predictive echoes, as if the system was already ahead of human time. Dr. Patel ran simulation after simulation, mapping the timing intervals. The result chilled him. The pulses formed a countdown, 12 intervals remaining until synchronization. When complete, the arc and its 12 counterparts would align on a frequency never before recorded in planetary science, 0.083 Hertz, the exact resonance once theorized to occur at the boundary between the Earth's outer and inner core. To those who believed it meant awakening. To those who feared, it meant the end of control. Around the world, new phenomena appeared. In the Namib Desert, dunes began to vibrate in harmonic motion, creating tones that matched the Pacific hum. In Siberia, frozen lakes cracked in concentric rings. In Cairo, sensors beneath the Great Pyramid registered electromagnetic surges timed perfectly with the pulse. The planet was behaving like an instrument tuning itself. Meanwhile, the echo, still descending, entered the upper atmosphere. Radar showed it losing mass, fragmenting deliberately into 12 smaller spheres. Each fragment took a different trajectory, streaking silently toward one of the node coordinates. They didn't impact. They merged, every node brightened, every pulse synchronized. The countdown reached 0. Narrator's voice drops to a whisper. For exactly 1 second, the entire planet resonated at a single tone. Oceans stilled, winds ceased, machines froze. Then from the Pacific Arc, a narrow beam of light rippled outward, encircling the globe and vanishing into the dark beyond the moon. The data that followed contained no words, no binary, no language, only a pattern identical to the DNA helix, scaled to planetary proportions. It wasn't a warning, Dr. Vega said later. It was an introduction. And so the question changed again, not what had awakened, but who was listening. For weeks after the transmission, the world lived in uneasy silence. The storms had calmed, the skies cleared. The hum that once shook steel and air had vanished entirely. Only the arc remained, a monument of quiet intent rising from the Pacific. Scientists returned to ordinary work, or tried to, but even the most skeptical admitted that something had shifted, not only in the planet's field lines or frequencies, but in the way people looked at the stars. The idea that the Earth itself might have spoken could no longer be dismissed as imagination. At Project Meridian, the command hall was nearly empty now. Dr. Vega sat alone, surrounded by quiet machines that once translated chaos into numbers. On her screen, the line of outbound light still streamed toward Epsilon Indi, steady, unwavering. She wondered if anyone, or anything, had already received it. Then, on the morning of February 19, 2026, the signal changed. It began as a whisper, barely measurable, a faint modulation riding the tail of the outgoing beam, folding back toward Earth. Instruments registered it as interference at first, but when analysts reversed the data flow, the truth became clear. The signal was coming back. A return pulse. 12 seconds of coded noise. Then silence. Vega stared at the waveform, her heart hammering. She cleaned the data, normalized it, and converted it into visual form. What appeared on her screen was not language, not numbers, but shape. 2 interlocking triangles. One pointing upward, one downward, flickering like mirrored reflections. And then, for a single frame, the triangles merged into a circle. Within that circle appeared a pattern of dots, 12 points surrounding one central sphere, the same geometry that had defined the arc, the echo, and the network that encircled the globe. The code beneath the symbol translated into 6 English words. "We heard you." Transmission confirmed. The message carried no coordinates, no request, no threat. It was simple acknowledgement, like the first nod between strangers across an infinite distance. Vega played the recording again. The same words, the same tone, the same certainty. "They're not coming," she whispered. "They're answering." Within hours, observatories across the world confirmed the return signal. The thread of light linking Earth to Epsilon Indi shimmered once more, brighter than before, then faded back to invisibility. The ark's surface glowed faintly in response, a soft pulse every 3 hours and 39 minutes, the same heartbeat with which it had begun. No further signals followed. No ships appeared. No contact was made. Yet the world was different. Children looked up at the stars with new curiosity. Astronomers found that the ionosphere had stabilized in a more uniform configuration. Earth's magnetic poles shifted slightly, aligning with the coordinates of the 12 nodes. Subtle, harmonious, balanced. The ark had not left, but it no longer hummed. It listened, and so did humanity. In every corner of the planet, people gathered to watch the horizon where the ark stood, half submerged, reflecting starlight like a mirror to the sky. It had become both question and answer, proof that the universe was not silent, only waiting for someone to speak in the right frequency. Dr. Vega stood on the shoreline one last time, wind pulling at her hair, the distant glow of the ark soft on the water. She closed her eyes and imagined the message still traveling outward, passing stars, drifting through the quiet dark toward whatever mind might someday reply again. Maybe, she said softly, this was never about discovering them. Maybe it was about teaching ourselves to listen. Above her, the constellations shimmered, no longer cold, no longer distant, but alive with the faint rhythm of connection. A single tone echoed faintly in the air, the same 3 notes that had begun it all. Earth, once silent, was now part of a greater conversation, and as long as the signal continued, humanity would never again be alone.